able to change in presenting this case a second time, something that I missed, something along those lines, and that very often goes into these decisions that, well, we could have done this differently. You know, no case is absolutely perfect, but there are, you know, minor things that may have happened, but there's nothing earth-shattering that's going to change how I present this case or what the facts are that come into the case. The second thing is, and like I said before, I think the jury selection is the biggest thing. I think I said before, and I'll say it again, I think we had a really good jury. These were very conscientious jurors. They were put in a unique situation. We've never had a situation where we've spent, you know, a week, almost 5 days, picking a jury where they're sitting alone, you know, for days on end before they even start hearing the case. With that being said, they paid attention. They asked good questions. They were engaged that entire time. So this was a really good jury from my perspective, and I can't always say that. You know, the questions they asked were, for the most part, on point when they're going through that process, and they spent a long time in deliberations. So they took this case, gave it the seriousness that it should have gotten. Now, I know some of the numbers have been out there. From my understanding, this did play a role in my decision making. You know, it initially came out as 4-4-4, kind of a split. Not surprising, 4 for guilty, 4 for not guilty, and 4 kind of undecided. It did shift to 7-5, I think right about the time we got the first maybe we're hung kind of a response from the jury, and then it moved to 10-2 for not guilty. So that does play a role, and so with that being, I took a look at what is our history in our office in terms of doing a retrial, and quite frankly, we've had about 15 hung juries in the last 6 years, and we've only retried 1 in that 6-year period, and that was 11-1 for guilty. And looking at the facts of that case, it was a pretty overwhelming case, and so that's a case where you have a rogue juror. This was not a case with a rogue juror. I think this case, they paid attention, they did a lot to try and arrive at a verdict, and they couldn't arrive at a verdict. So then it goes back to, okay, what do I do differently? What can we do differently the next time we have this jury panel or to select a jury? I looked at what we did in the process. There were 43 strikes for cause. A lot of those were, you know, they couldn't spend the time, they had conflicts, whatever it may be, but out of those, I recognized there were 15 that we said showed a bias to our case, at least in the process right there when we're questioning them. That didn't even reach, we had identified 30 before we even started selecting a jury of what I would term problematic jurors that I could say, geez, they're going to be a problem if we get them on the panel. They didn't make it into the jury box. So we then used, 10 of our 12 peremptory challenges. I talked about this earlier where, we cleaned out people that after they came forward and for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, some of which had ties with law enforcement, that, we did everything we could. I can't eliminate everybody that has ties to law enforcement, because I've heard that out there is that, well, there's people on there that had ties to law enforcement. You're not going to eliminate everybody. That's not possible. So that's always going to be a factor. So what it boils down to is, I put the best case I could forward. When I tried this case, I did the best I could. I did everything I could. The jury couldn't reach a verdict. I still stand by the decision. I have, been involved in a number of officer-involved shooting cases or use of force cases. I've cleared most of them. This is one I thought should go to a jury. Have a jury decide based on, there's a substantial question of the reasonableness of his actions based on the totality of circumstances. We argued that, and the jury, a very good jury, was not able to reach a verdict. So I just don't see how, when you do your best you can, it comes in as good as you can. Generally, it's going to go worse the second time around, and I just don't see us being able to reach a verdict. I think you'll have the same, even if, maybe we get some people on our, on our side more in terms of, I think we'll just have the same amount maybe hung on the other side. I just don't see a place where we get 12 people to agree. This has split the community. I've heard over the last 2 weeks people passionately on both sides calling me, emailing me, advocating for and against a retrial. So that didn't play a role. I got to make this decision on my own. And looking at looking at everything I had, looking at the facts, quite frankly, I felt there was not a basis to be able to retry this case and have a verdict at the end. So I made the decision to not do that.
Can you talk about the message this sends to the community?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any message. I'm not big on messages sending to the community. I mean, I think we try and make our decisions based on the facts and analysis, and in every case. I mean, I don't think this is, something that I'm trying to send a message by, charging them or not charging them. I made this decision based on the facts, based on the law, and what I thought I could prove. Like I said, I thought it went as good as it could have, but the jury, it's always a jury decision, and you never know what his jury's going to do. But based on what I had, we had a very good jury, and I just don't see it, coming to a different conclusion. So I don't know if there's a message there. It's I think to some extent the system works. I think this is a split community on this issue, and but I still trust in the jury system, and sometimes this happens.
What does this mean? What does this mean for Schurr? Is he a free man now? What does this mean for him?
We're not proceeding any further. He's been free. He's been out on bond all this time, so he's gonna, we're just not gonna proceed. The case will essentially, be closed.
Did you consider reducing the charge and going for a conviction for voluntary manslaughter?
No, I thought about that, but I think that's kind of, that looks like, I wasn't confident in my second degree. I think it was a second degree murder, and if the jury wanted to consider a lesser, I just didn't think that was, we were accused during the trial of trying to switch around what we're doing, and, if that's what I thought it was at the start, I'm not going to change it just to maybe, okay, let's try a different way to get a guilty verdict. At the beginning, I thought it was a second degree murder, and I'm going to try it on that or not try it at all.
Can you talk about, have you spoken to the Lyoya family?
I did. I spoke with Peter about a half hour, 45 minutes ago, and he's obviously very disappointed. This has been a very difficult case, and I apologize profusely. I'm very sorry I couldn't bring it to a conclusion for them. He said I lost a child, and he did, and I feel for them, and I feel for any family that loses a child in a homicide. So he's clearly not happy. I tried to explain it the best I could, but I don't think there's anything I could say that was going to make this, that he's going to be happy about it. And I understand that.
Chris, at the end you said it was 10 jurors for not guilty. I just wanted
Correct.
to clarify that.
It was 10-2 was the final. That was my understanding of the final tally.
Thank you.
Can you walk us through, what have you been doing with this extra time? Why was this a decision you couldn't make on the day of? And what was going through your mind and thinking, there's a chance to bring this back? You knew on the day of this was a good jury. You knew the case you had presented. You knew the facts pretty well. Have you been going back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big decision. I mean, obviously, this is a big decision, and this isn't something you just rush into saying, oh, we got a hung jury, so I'm going to forget about it. I mean, I want to make sure, like I said, that's why I went through this process. I've never gone back and watched portions of a trial before to try and see, okay, is there something I missed? Is there something I got to do differently? When you're in the heat of, a trial, you do miss things, and so did we screw up on the jury selection? Maybe, I thought it was a good jury. Did I miss something in that selection process? So, I knew the gravity of this decision. It has a big impact on the community, it has a big impact on, the Schurr family, has a big impact on the Lyoya family. So I didn't want to rush into it after, trials take a chunk out of you. It was a very, I spent a lot of time on this case. My office spent a lot of time on this case. Michigan State Police, they did a very nice job, and they spent a lot of time on this case. So it's not like I'm just going to come up with a decision that at that moment I wanted to be thoughtful and consider everything I could, and that's why I took the time I did.
The jury foreperson, when they came in to announce they were hung, looked angry. Did you get a chance to talk with her?
We asked about that last time. She said she kind of slipped in the chair, and she wasn't angry, mad. She kind of fell into the chair. So that's the response I got at the time. So that's all I can tell you. That's she kind of addressed that. She didn't appear to be that way.
Did you know what the holdouts were holding out for?
I don't know. We didn't. It's not, and that's the thing. It's it's not like we talked to every single juror. There was only certain jurors that wanted to talk to us, and we didn't. It's not like we tried to press them. I mean, so I wasn't involved in the deliberations to know, blow by blow. So I don't, didn't get that in depth.
So if Christopher Schurr wanted his job back at the GRPD, they said he didn't violate training or policy. He's got nothing hanging over his head.
You'd have to ask the GRPD that. I don't know how they'd handle that. But obviously there's no criminal conviction, so yeah, and we're not seeking anything further.
Can you
An
just,
estimate on the cost of the trial between expert witnesses and security, and did that play a role?
No, cost did not play a role whatsoever. I mean, that's, we spent a lot on experts in terms of what the sheriff spent on security. I don't know that, that's outside of my budget. I know part of our budget, we budgeted in for experts because we spent a substantial amount. I still haven't got the full, I think we're missing at least one of them, but we're probably $60,000, $70,000 just in experts.
The defense had mentioned that had this gone to another trial, they would have appealed or filed for the exclusion of certain evidence, particularly looking at like the police training. Did that play a decision at all, or did that play a role?
No, I mean it's been like this for the last 3 years. I mean we fought this all the way up to the Supreme Court essentially, and so just the fact that they said, oh, we're going to fight some more, yeah, that you don't look at costs, you don't look at what that is. It's can you bring it to a conclusion you think there's a reasonable chance, and I just don't think there is.
the jury had been split 50-50, would we have a different decision today?
I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. You don't know that because, it's not just looking at those numbers. It's looking at, they spent a lot of time, and that part of it, and when you look at, if they come back in an hour and they say we're hung and, well, did they really spend a lot of time? So there's so many different factors. That's just one factor I definitely took a look at, but it's not just, okay, the jury came back, it's 11-1, we're going to automatically retry. You take a look at everything. So I can't just say that's a hypothetical, but I don't know.
Can you talk about what they were hung up on? I don't know if you've mentioned that.
I don't, what they're hung out. They talked what they were talking about. They're on the issues. I mean, they're on the issues, and training came up, and reasonableness of the use of force. I mean, they were on point in terms of the things we argued. What hung them up, and what they really, got them. And once again, I'm only speaking for the ones that spoke to me. You could get a different perspective depending on a different juror. But they were, from what I got from I spoke to more than one. They were definitely on the issues, the points. And they weren't off on some tangents. I've talked to juries where you're like, how did you come up with that? This was not that jury, so they were definitely on the things both sides were focusing on.
Did you get a sense from jurors, or do you imagine that there's a difference between jurors who reside in Grand Rapids versus the rest of the county?
Don't know. Yeah, I didn't get into that. I really don't know who, yeah, we have it when we go through the jury, but when we were talking with them, I don't know.
Can you talk about the racial issue here? Obviously, this became a racial issue. There were civil rights leaders here.
Sure.
There were marches and protests, and now this decision. Can you discuss that?
What would you like me to discuss? It's been an issue, and in terms of the relations between the police and the minority community, that is an issue. I don't know what else we can say about that. That I think there's a lot of split along those lines when you look in the community and how people side on that. But that's, quite frankly, it's nothing new. That's always been out there for probably as long as I've been, a prosecutor. So it's, I'd like to see it healed. I'd like to see that come together. I hope that at some point in time we can. But, I don't know if even if we get a conviction or not guilty, I don't think that changes the underlying issues. I don't think that somehow cures everything if we suddenly won this trial or flip, there's an acquittal. It's going to be out there, and it's something we're all going to deal with, and I think we're all trying, we being law enforcement, are trying to deal with that. I think Chief Winstrom's trying to deal with that. He's been trying to deal with that since this happened, and it's something I try and deal with as well in terms of my outreach. So it's something we always got to work on, and I hope we continue to do so.
Do you think they need more policy changes at GRPD, specifically the foot chase policy?
That's going to be up to GRPD. I have a number of policies. I don't, ask the chief on my policies, and, that's something that's going to have to, that's up to GRPD.
Do you have any input on their policies?
Nope, never have, and they don't have any input in my policies either, so. One more question?
Chris, legally, does this preclude, is this the end of the case, or can the state attorney general file charges on this, or even, and of course, federal charges could still come too?
Technically, the attorney general could. She never has before, but technically, I think that there's always a possibility. But
Have you heard from her office?
nope, not at all. All right, thank you.